Streaming live. Welcome. I'm going to pull up. I jotted down some questions. I know none of these are going to get asked. We're just going to talk about other fun stuff. But thanks for joining me, man.
Thank you for having me.
I appreciate you having me on your podcast. But just to introduce you, Dr. Zeyad Baker, co-founder.
I'm the number 2 on the co-founder.
No, number 2? Yeah. All right. Well, that's very humble of you. But
I have a younger brother who's much smarter. So you can imagine the mental trauma I've had to deal with most of my life.
It happens. Let me just do something. Just make sure you're in there, just to make sure. I had a guest once that was a little further away, and it was like, these mics are, they're budget. So we gotta play with the budget. So, but that's great. And I've been really interested in sort of watching you guys and, grow over the last couple of years as we've been here on Route 17 in Paramus. But I'd love to hear about Baker Health because it's a different concept from what the average doctor's office is. Love to hear your summary or your pitch about what that is exactly.
Sure. Before I get into it, I think there's 2 comments that are somewhat, one is ironic. I think the reason you're curious is because from what I've gleaned from your practice and your operation, it's very similar in that it's attempting to be an alternative, dare I say a disruptive option for those that are just frustrated with everything that is healthcare as they know it. And so I'm not surprised that you're curious because I was curious about what you're doing because I think we're traveling the same path in primary care and orthopedics respectively. The way it happened for my brother and I is I actually don't know that folks can do what you're doing or what we're doing if they didn't practice traditional healthcare first. Mm-hmm. Because I think, you know how they have these terms like Gen X, Gen Z, Gen A, Gen B, all these gens that you don't know what the hell they mean. So all I know is like every few years there's a different gen and there's different characteristics. When I come from a family of doctors, okay? So both my brothers, there's 3 of us, we're all doctors. My father's a doctor. My father-in-law is a doctor, right? So, and so we see different generations. And what I've seen is you have the older generation, like my father, my father-in-law, who, those were the golden age. And for people that think progress is always in the right direction, I can promise you there was no such concept as burnout. There wasn't frustration with insurance companies, and patients were happier 30 years ago than they are now. And by the way, the statistics show the quality of life medically also and mentally was better. And so that might be a shock to those, but go look it up, okay? We didn't have like 20% kids with anxiety 30 years ago. Yeah. So that was the golden age. And the doctors worked harder than anybody works now, but were happier than any doctor is now. There wasn't middlemen insurance companies or whatever. So that was one age. I have probably the smartest kid in my family. His name's Rami. He's an internal medicine resident. And he just finished his intern year. Brilliant kid. He's super happy. He's just as happy as kind of they were because he came into medicine being like, okay, this is kind of a lifestyle decision. I'll have like weekends off and I could focus on my health and all that. Something that was foreign to them. But the point is both of those generations knew what they were getting into. I think our generation caught the tail end of the, prehistoric golden age and all the changes, whether it's HMOs, middlemen, PBMs, prior authorizations. The doctor not deciding in your world, you're one of many voices that decides if an MRI is approved. A decade ago, it was you. So we saw that the people who trained us along those lines, where the doctor is the one who is really calling the shots and not some third party that's never put hands on the patient. And in the midst of our journey, what happened is a transformation that I think by and large was for the worst. I think the majority of changes that have happened in healthcare in the 15 years I've been practicing have been to the detriment of the patient. And I could go through a long list. I'll give you one example. I was giving a talk, actually, I was talking to a group of students a couple of days ago. I was just telling somebody this like an hour ago. The title of the talk I said, technology is great everywhere except in healthcare. And like health tech. Now every startup, everybody's like health tech. And at Baker Health, we have an app and we use technology and we harness it in a good way. But in my last year of residency, I forget when exactly, Obamacare came out and there was a mandate for EMRs, right? And everybody's like, yeah, doctor's handwriting sucks. Of course we want EMRs. Then we could communicate all this promise. You don't have to, you'll be able to read what the doctor writes. And then your hospital and my hospital can communicate. We're not chasing down CDs of MRIs, right? All this promise. That was like 20 years ago. Now what you have is instead of the doctor coming in, sitting and talking to the patient, and maybe his handwriting is not great, but at least he connected. He or she can make eye contact. Now the doctor's buried looking at a computer, making sure they click everything. The patient's the second thing on their mind after a note. Mm-hmm. And by the way, that interoperability, I still have patients all the time hunting down medical records, all the time getting CDs. They haven't
mandated the EHR, but they didn't mandate the interoperability.
Right. Yeah. So they've detracted from the human experience and they haven't added those perceptual victories that they thought they would. Mm-hmm. And so the point I'm making is all these advancements, quote unquote, consolidation in the industry. Wouldn't it be great if all the doctors got together and the hospital systems got the doctors? Theoretically, it's great. But now referral patterns and so on are dictated more by the logo on your jersey than the quality of the guy you're sending to. All right. And patients, I think, kind of know that. So the point is having thought it was going to be one thing and in our generation, seen it transform into something, I think, worse. I think some of us, you, me, Zeyad, felt, do we have to accept this? Do we have to continue to just go with this downward kind of momentum, or can we do something different? And I know you're doing that in orthopedics, and then in primary care, we've tried to do that. And so in the past couple of years, we started with technology that we think does make your life easier. We don't think having the 100th flavor of an EMR is going to change anything, okay? But we think you not having to call the office and text on the app and having automatic telehealth visits whenever you're overseas and so on helps you a lot. We think not having a wait time through smart scheduling helps you a lot. So it's holistic primary care. We do a lot of holistic things. We're preventative first, not medicine first. We still take the great parts of what we were trained on, but we try to fix the stuff that we don't like.
So would it be wrong to call it a boutique practice, or is it?
You call it boutique, yeah, boutique,
or whatever,
concierge, membership based,
okay.
And we call it member centric, right? Yeah. So like we spent, I spent a year not working and just doing market research and studying things. So if you told me, like when I was 30, that when I was 41 or 40 or whatever I was, that when I was 40, which is, the peak of your powers theoretically, I was going to sit on the sidelines for 12 months and not see patients and not practice medicine, I'd have told you, take any bet, but don't take that bet. It's not going to happen. That's what happened. And I spent like endless nights just thinking about the language we would use. And so member, you serve a member. Like if you're a member of something, my job is to serve you. Patients you treat, mm-hmm. right? Instead of, we talk about the experience, not a visit or an encounter, right? Like the team in the offices, you'll hear them talk about, and it's reservations because you're seen on time. If I tell you have an appointment with a doctor, immediately, you don't need to know the doctor. You don't need to know where it is. If I tell you appointment, you're etching in a 45-minute grueling wait time with magazines that are 10 years old in the waiting room. That's what you hear when you see appointment. If I say you have a reservation at a restaurant, you expect to be seen on time. So we co-opted that. We asked, why can't you do that? Why can't you bring hospitality and experience excellence into healthcare? Like many things, everybody assumed you can't. But when you actually sat folks down and said, why can't you? Nobody gave you an answer. They said, well, that's just the way it is. And so we spent a lot of time putting the infrastructure there, and boutique or concierge, but it's member-centric. And the last thing I'll say about that, I think it's a good way to think about it, at least in my mind's eye. When I was practicing in more traditional setting, and you could probably relate to this, once a week, somebody on the team would come running to be like, Dr. Baker, in 15 minutes, Miriam's my wife, Miriam's mother or her friend or whatever, her friend's kid is coming in. He had an allergic reaction. So we're putting him in room 13 because every office has room 13, which is like the VIP room they save. And they're going to come up through the doctor's entrance. They don't go into the waiting room, right? They're seen and they pull you, the doctor, out of whatever you're doing to go to tend to them. Right. And that's what happens when it's a close family or friend. And by the way, they don't call the office for an appointment. They have your cell. They text you directly. Mm-hmm. Right. And so we said, let's bring that to all the members.
Yeah.
And so that's the founding kind of principle that Zeyad and I had. And then and the team we put together is really the kind of straw that stirs the drink. You've met some of them, and I think, to be honest with you, that's our secret weapon. Like, I think we could give the playbook. I think I could tell people, go build an app, use these words, and but I think you cannot execute unless you have the right people, and I think that's our biggest strength.
So I've seen a number of doctors who, from exactly what you described before, kind of an aversion to where healthcare has gone, try to roll out a member type of concierge boutique, but maybe not, maybe with, I think we all think of it when it conceptually as, oh, well, if I retain, 5% of my patients, but they're paying X amount, that's this plus whatever else equals a business model. But it seems as though those who have tried that aren't always overwhelmingly successful, or certainly the market is much more limited. And I think it gets to what you're describing, which is it takes market research, it takes care on every word, it takes a brand, and you're selling an experience. You have to transition yourself as the doctor offering the same thing but behind a paywall to a totally different experience, right?
Yeah.
It's I want to say a spa is kind of downgrading it, but it should be a comforting experience. It should be not like, oh, I gotta go to the doctor. It's like, oh, I'm going to the doctor's today.
Yeah.
I'm going to my club almost,
Yeah, I agree. I don't think, to be honest, Peter, I think a spa or a hotel, like a 5-star hotel experience, is an upgrade for healthcare. And I think a lot of times what happens, and the reason doctors can't get it right, is our ego. Is we think, okay, well, I'm the doctor. Isn't that enough?
Yeah.
Right? Isn't that enough? Like, you have a problem and I can fix you. They don't say, wait a second, 92% of the doctor-patient experience has nothing to do with the doctor. 92% of the experience is on the phone, not with ring, 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 nobody answering. Finally, someone answers, hi, thanks for calling Dr. Baker's office. Please hold. I can't get anybody. 92% of it is, I get to, my appointment's at 10 a.m. I get there at 9:45 a.m. It's 10:40 and I'm still in the waiting room. 92% of it is, my kid fell down the stairs on Sunday and you're closed. So now I have to go to an ER and get a $1,000 deductible bill. Instead, the doctor just focuses on the doctor. They say, wait, I really care about my patients and I do really good work, but that's where it stops. They don't consider the rest of the experience. I think a spa or a hotel never says we have a good bed, so you're good. The Four Seasons doesn't say that. They say the bed has to be good. The doctor has to be good. But most of the experience is around that. And our ego as doctors can't even fathom that. They're like, wait, the word hospitality in healthcare, I used to be on hospital boards and all these places. And when we would talk about like experience, you should have, if I've been in, I once had dinner with the guy who does the hospitality for the Mandarin Oriental. Okay. Which is like a great hotel chain. And I've had multiple meals with patient experience officers at health systems. And let me tell you, the standards by which they measure how good a patient experience is versus a hotel guest. If my grandma's sick, I want the person measuring using the Mandarin Oriental's experience in terms of, is her bed clean? And if you think these experiential metrics are superfluous, I go back to the 92%, right? Like, go to the nursing homes, right? Your grandma who's in the nursing home, 0.01% of her experience is with the doctor who rounds there once every 2 weeks. Most of it is the staff. Are they cleaning her properly? A lot of the infections, a lot of the medical outcomes are the result of poor, quote unquote, experience. And so, and then I'll just go back to the people for a moment. For the doctors who say, I'm going to provide a differentiated experience, a lot of times you ask them, well, what do you do to provide a different experience? And it's not what you say, it's what you do. I have yet to meet a doctor who doesn't think they're the best. You can relate to this, right? How many of your colleagues or guys you went to med school say, you know what? I'm like average. I've never heard a doctor say that. Okay. So then you just say, okay, cool. So we're all
not out loud, at least.
Yeah. So you ask them, great. So what is it that we do? What is it that you do that's different? Right. Yeah. If you're okay. Yeah. And then you say, well, do you train the staff in this? What's your workflows? How do you, and so a lot of it is, what are the actionized items? What are the things you do that then when you have a member, and they say, so you signed up for Baker Health, you're a member of Baker Health. what is it like? They say, I've gone 20 times and I've never been seen 1 minute past my appointment. I've gone 20 times and I've never once had to call the office. I just schedule it through the app. And even though I've gone 20 times, there's been 60 times there was something wrong with me. And 40 of those 60, I didn't have to go in. I sent a text message with a picture of my conjunctivitis or a picture of my kid's diaper rash, and they fixed it immediately.
Yeah.
And so when you're doing something different, you could deliver something different, and people are willing to accept something different. I think just saying, "Hey, we're different," you gotta deliver the beef.
You got to deliver. I think that's a big differentiator, because a lot of people say a lot of things and they just deliver the same old beef. So that's really interesting, and I'm glad that you're really creating a model for others to emulate, because that's the way healthcare should be. Now, granted, be it membership, maybe there's other models that could deliver similar care. Maybe would you say this is sort of like, I don't know what your membership cost structure is and stuff, but obviously, you need to have some means to buy into it, and you're getting something for that. The question is, what about everyone else? And what do they have to deal with? Because I'm always struck, the same way you were similarly alarmed by how broken our system is. Certainly, you've probably trained in county clinics. I mean, we've got county clinics, we've got Baker Health, and everything in between. And look, everyone, I get it. Not everyone should be eating Morton steak every night. I mean, that's just the way. But people should eat food, and how do we, what's right? And I think that's always the political debate too, about healthcare is a right and this and that. But even people who have good insurance can't even barely get their MRIs covered, and people that have a job, a lot of times they get the job for the reasons for maintaining their health benefits, and they still can't get reasonable access to care and stuff like that. So I feel like, it's sort of the separation that we have economically between the rich and the poor, but also in terms of the have and have-nots. And there's a lot more have-nots these days in healthcare when it comes to paying a lot and getting very little. And by the way, premiums seem to never go down. However little they pay us, or they always dwindle down the reimbursements. So, and by the way, nobody wants to listen to a podcast, listen to a doctor complain about getting paid, but there is a reality. And I think to some of what you brought up, which was sort of the golden years of healthcare, you mentioned your dad, your uncle too?
Yeah, my dad and my father-in-law.
Your father-in-law. And they presumably enjoyed much more freedom when it came to decision making. Yeah. Probably got paid a bit better for the services they provided, and they, like you said, because of that, they worked harder. It seems like, to me, like the rug's been pulled out from underneath doctors, for better, for worse. And and who have they been pulled out by? To me, they've been pulled out by business people and bankers, who have seen healthcare as a fertile ground and a fertile opportunity to essentially leverage their business acumen and commoditize and securitize, people's ailments and their health. And they've put us in charge of driving that, driving that ship. But in doing so, they've disenfranchised a whole generation of us, unfortunately. And I'm interested to know, because you said it was your family member who was an intern in internal medicine.
Yeah.
I'd be interested to know, because I think we've all had that purity of zeal for healthcare when we know we're getting paid $30,000 a year to be a resident. We understand the what we're exchanging for that, and work in exchange for learning. But we love that, because we're giving, we're sacrificing, and we're learning, and we're giving to others. We're doing the purity of what we got into medicine for. But what happens when you graduate? The day you graduate, what do? You sign a contract with a health system. Then I'd be curious to know, is Rami?
Yeah.
Is he happy then at that point?
Well,
maybe he'll join Baker Health. Maybe he'll join Baker Health. He will be happy.
Yeah.
But for those who don't have that opportunity, that's the question, is like, is there opportunity for docs coming out who got into it for the right reasons, who then get, unfortunately, a lot of times chewed up and spit out by the system. And I worry about that, for my own kids, by the way, who, some of whom, both of them say one and maybe the other express some interest in, I never want to discourage my kids.
How old are the kids?
My kids are 13 and 11. So my son's 13.
Same as mine. Yeah.
Yeah. So do your kids talk about
everything but?
Everything but?
Yeah.
Do you encourage, discourage,
NBA, space.
NBA
science.
Or MBA?
No, both. Both actually.
Oh, that's smart.
That's one of them's like basketball obsessed. The other one's like science obsessed, but not in the more like wake up at 4 a.m, watch Elon Musk shoot a rocket. Kind of.
That's cool.
Not healthcare though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's just natural. They're just naturally going on their merry way, or they just saw you toiling away in healthcare and were like, that's not for me. Or I guess kids always see.
I never actually stopped to think about why that. I never stopped because I don't care. Like I'm sure you feel the same way. I really don't. I don't want them to be anything other than happy. And since I've never been like, I want them to be doctors, why are they not interested in doctors? I've never done the math. As I'm sitting here, I'm trying to contemplate it actually in real time. I'll get
because
back
so many
to you.
doctors in your family.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So you've got plenty of role models.
Maybe they're like, I want to be anything but dad.
Listen, I almost, to my son the other day, I was telling him like, my daughter actually wants to be she said she wants to be a plastic surgeon now because she sliced her leg open with a broken piece of glass and filmed me while I sutured it up for her in the emergency room. And
you stitched your daughter up.
I did.
That's awesome.
I did. Well, I went into the local hospital. The guys know me, and I'm like, what am I going to do? Call my plastic surgery buddies like on a Saturday, afternoon. I'm like, I'm a hand surgeon. I can suture a leg, But I think I did a pretty decent job. But she filmed me, and she's like, oh, I want to be a plastic surgeon. She wants to suture. And ironically, she was sitting there suturing in the suture kit the night before. So she should have done it herself. But I told my son, up until this point, I didn't think he was interested in medicine, but then a couple of times I told him, I'm like, I don't want you to be, I want to kind of almost like gently kind of discourage.
Yeah.
And this is a question I wanted to ask you actually, but I wanted to gently discourage him in a way, in a positive way, but like explore other things.
Yeah.
Because I think that the bias is like, I know what dad does, he's successful, and I could, draft him into the, into my career.
Sure.
And I'd rather him kind of push him away and just watch him float back if he has that affinity towards it. I don't know if that's the right thing or not, but I was thinking, I'm like, I'd rather, as opposed to telling him like, you should just come in and train up and I'll get you, I'll open some doors for you, because I could do that probably. That's how it works sometimes. Yeah. And, he's a good student, so he would make the grades and stuff. But, I think that I wonder how debilitating sometimes it is when you're father. And I don't have this situation because my dad, albeit successful, but he was an accountant. He actually was in hospital administration. So I got a little bit exposed in that way, but I took a totally different path, obviously, into the medical track. And no one's I've just kind of learned this on my own and done this on my own. Mm-hmm. But as someone who's like a son or a daughter of someone who's a healthcare entrepreneur, clearly successful, smart, how do you carve your own path, even if it's in the same line of work, without feeling disenfranchised or intimidated or feeling like it's expected of them?
Yeah. That's a great question. Actually, to be honest with you, Peter, I'm actually enjoying this conversation because these are some questions that they're kind of personal, and you would think, at least if not in a professional setting, I think about as a father, my influence, and I do, but not in this way. So it's really enjoyable mental exercise right now. And I'm kind of just answering live. I think if you allow me, I want to just deconstruct some of the points so I could give you the best answer and most honest and truthful answer. And again, this is raw. So I'd say first your point about sometimes, if I can quote you correctly, sometimes I try to almost discourage them so that like I'm not pulling them in if they really want it kind of thing. I'm a big believer in general that the best encouragement is discouragement. And I mentioned like the quality of our team at Baker Health. Any leader at the organization will tell you that before they joined, I gave them 30 reasons not to join. I would sit and say, I don't think you really want to come. I know it's cool. It's a doctor's office that plays hip hop and we dress cool, but you don't get it. On Sundays, I'm gonna be all over you on Sunday in preparation for Monday. Even though your shift starts Monday, we're gonna have touch bases on Sunday when you're off the clock. And if a member messages Tuesday night at midnight and you're at a bachelor party, and this happens, and I need you to follow up on something, you're gonna go into the business office at that hotel in Vegas and get that done. Okay, so look, we try to pay our people well. We have a great environment. We hang out. It's social. There's a lot of cool things, but I don't think you get it. You don't want to be here. And then they have to spend time with us and blah, blah, blah. And I think even with children, that's very, very important. I personally think like opening doors for kids or helping kids beyond a certain extent. And I toil with this, like, should your kids go to a private school? What kind of things should you give your kids? Like, and instinctively you want to give your children more than you had, right? That's, part of the definition of being a parent, but you could it's like a razor's edge where you could very quickly get into a position where you're doing them a massive disservice. And I've seen this a million times. I've seen more folks screw up because they got too much than I've seen folks screw up because they didn't get enough. I could give you stories on this. And so I think when it comes to my children, I think one thing is I just point at their mother. She kind of gets this stuff way right. It's more kind of instinctive for her. She's just, I think you met her. She's like, she's kind of got it figured out. So I always point to her as an example. The other thing is, I think like what I care is that they have work ethic, they have integrity, and they're good people. And I find if you have those ingredients, and I was saying this actually to somebody, she works for us, and she was going to go be a provider, a clinician. And she's now gone into administration, and she's as bright as can be. And she was like, well, what do you think of this, that? And I said, if you have those basic ingredients, you're going to do great whatever you do. Like, whether you're a doctor, whatever, I think in the end, look, like you said, the rug gets pulled out from under. Your industry could get disrupted. 5 minutes ago, being a software engineer was where it's at. Now, Chat GPT's, laughing at you, right? So you just need to have those core ingredients. And I think that's our job as parents, is to make sure when our kid is 18, 19, 20, and they walk out the door, they have that resourcefulness, they're armed, they're very solid people, that they'll do well, whatever it is they pick. I think that's more important than what they do, is who they are. And I think that's how I look at my job. Now, one thing you said about, and that led to this part of the conversation, was like these finance guys, these bankers, and disempowering, disenfranchising us and de facto patients. I agree with you. I think there's a couple of ways to look at that. I think one way to look at this is to say, okay, all this power and authority is being stripped from doctors, right, by all these folks. And so that's unfortunate. The other perspective here is there's a lot of opportunity within the system for entrepreneurial-minded, resourceful, creative folks to get together. And there's no reason that because you have an MD after your name, you can't be the one to do it. In fact, I would argue we have an advantage. Again, it's funny, I was talking about our ego as doctors in terms of the clinical experience and thinking our responsibility ends when the patient leaves the exam room, right? And our ego not letting us lower ourselves to contemplating wait time or how many times the phone rings, right? Well, we have the flip side of that. I'm always shocked. I'll sit with the smartest doctors like yourself. I'll sit with the chief of nurse. How many times I've sat with these guys that are at the very top of the food chain in terms of chief of whatever at Columbia or chief of whatever at NYU. And they're like, yeah, but I don't know. I guess I'm just going to sell my practice. I guess I'm just going to do this or that. I'm like, dude, you're 14 times smarter than these like 23-year-olds that walked in that are, whatever. And I think we have an insecurity about that. I think we think that because the earth is moving under us, that our best option is to hold on instead of push back. And I think what's happening now, I think there's more doctors like yourself, like the folks that I work with, that are saying, hold on, there's nothing to be scared of here. The patients are not loyal to the logo on the back of their insurance card. They're certainly not loyal to the pharmacy. They're not loyal even to their employer most of the time who's giving them the health insurance. But try to take away the doctor that they trust, good luck. They'll travel from anywhere. You know this and I know this. You have patients you've taken care of. They move to Florida. They move to Connecticut. They're still only going to come to you. Nobody has ever said, no. Don't take away my Cigna. Nobody's ever said that. And so we hold the cards. I think it's easy through the smoke and mirrors and the haze and the chaos that is healthcare for us to lose sight of that and to allow ourselves to be bullied or whatever. I think the tide is shifting. And the final comment I'll make on the economics, I think one thing I've seen, and even at Baker Health, we've had these conversations now, is most of the folks that we take care of get their health insurance through their employer. And employers now are having to struggle both with the economics of the healthcare costs as well as the competitive advantage that their healthcare benefits can offer to their employees. And that's where we've come in, is we say, listen, we actually decrease the cost for your employees because we're open 7 days a week, because they can access us when they're overseas, and we prevent 2 ER visits a year. Each ER visit costs you and the employee X amount of dollars. So economically, even though it's a membership-based model, actually we've shown that it decreases cost, but also it's a better experience. So now if you're an accountant and you're choosing between two firms, and one of the firms says, okay, you get this insurance plan, but this other one says you get this perk and we're going to pay for it. We're going to pay, they pick up the membership fee for their swath of 20 accountants or 100 lawyers. It's a competitive advantage. And I think this is an example of what's happening in the marketplace, because the bad news is healthcare is broken. The good news, everybody knows it. It's not like we're screaming from, I think a few years ago was a doctor saying, this is not going in the right direction. And he's like, what are you talking about? I still have my, I think now everybody's frustrated.
Everyone knows and everyone's frustrated. And you see it where it used to be the manufactured, doctor, the surprise bill, the sad, people in the kitchen, versus now finally it's, oh yeah, your insurance company is like screwing you. And it's finally where it needs to be. How that changes, which is the question, that I have for you is, where is healthcare in 5 and maybe 10 years?
I don't know. I think it depends. I think it's one of those situations where, in terms of a macro answer, I think I'm not smart enough to know, could there be like a tipping point where the right person or the wrong person in the White House pushes things a certain way, certain legislation's passed? I think it's unlikely to be seismically different in 5 to 10 years. What I do think is there's going to be more folks doing what we do in 5 to 10 years. So if right now folks like us make up probably less than 1% of the market, in 5 to 10 years, it might be 5% of the market. And what I mean by that is I think you'll have, quote, patients no longer thinking of themselves as patients, but thinking of themselves as healthcare consumers and, dare I say, members, and then being informed and being demanding and not accepting and saying, no. I don't want to just take what's given. This is my health, which is the single most important thing in my life. I want the best for this. And if there's 6 doctors on my street, I want to know the one who cares about giving me a quality experience and good outcomes. And I think that empowerment is going to continue as awareness and knowledge through conversations like this continue. So do I think in 5 to 10 years, the healthcare system is like the way we want it to be and unbroken? No. I do think it can't get worse. I think there's conversations like this that weren't happening 5 to 10 years ago that are happening. I think membership and alternative delivery care models are happening now. They weren't happening. And like I said, I think all the stakeholders, barring a few, want there to be a change. And so I think the momentum will be there, but I think it's probably going to be a longer time before everybody enjoys kind of what healthcare should be.
Yeah, I think the whole employer-based, insurance-based opacity of the system is hitting that tipping point. To your point, you brought up before we started Mark Cuban.
Yep.
And I've been enjoying listening to him more recently on some podcasts talk about why he sold his share in the Mavericks and why he's coming off a Shark Tank, and he's really his next. Based on what he says he wants to spend the next however long now developing his cost plus drugs. I mean, it's very brave of him to go out into this very tight, opaque market that is basically like a big scheme to take our healthcare dollars and put it into the pockets of the insurance companies, who, by the way, are publicly traded companies who go into our 401k value. Mm-hmm. So I think we all have a hand in fueling that a little bit. But at the same time, we're consumers, many of whom, need medications, a lot of medications. We saw he said he was inspired by when he saw that guy, Martin Shkreli or whatever, jack up the price of whatever it was. And he's like, he could do that?
Yeah.
Like, yeah, he could do that. And, and nothing, there's no recourse. Yeah. Whereas if you use those same set of rules, but, be transparent, and that's the key, is transparency, that the PBMs, literally, it's their kryptonite. Yep. If there was transparency, you'd see all the money that is getting, siphoned off, and you'd be like, wait, what? Yep. And so, as opposed to just demanding transparency, he's just saying, like, I'm just going to compete. Mm-hmm. And that's the American way. Yep. Isn't it?
Yeah. And I think you need someone like that. We'll see. I'm in the same camp as you. I admire what he's doing. I think it's bold and brave. And like we were talking, like, you take a guy who's a billionaire, who not only is a billionaire, he has, like, in my opinion, the dream gig. He owns an NBA team, which that's it. I put my feet up and call it a day. And he doesn't have, and he's not only dusting off kind of his cape to get back in the fight. He's picking a fight with the biggest bully. That is the incumbent healthcare infrastructure. He's not Elon Musk disrupted the car industry, and that's a big deal, and that's incredible. And as a result, he's like the richest guy. That's nothing compared to trying to take on the healthcare industry. Nothing. And if you could look at graphs on the GDP, the healthcare costs, and so on and so forth, I agree with you. For Mark Cuban and others to try to take it on, I think it's incredible. We're doing a small version of that. I think you need someone who's as well capitalized as he is, who can burn cash as he is, in order to take small losses to get the bigger victory that he intends to get. I also think it's not a coincidence that his angle, like the aperture he's going after, if this is the healthcare conglomerate, right? There's hospital stays, bed stays, nursing home stays. There's, surgeries, site of care. Like, why do you do it at a hospital when you could do it at a surgery center? That kind of stuff. And then there's pharma. And pharma, to your point, is actually in a system that is opaque, in a system that is just, let's just say, lacks transparency across the board. Not one part of it is more maligned in that regard than pharmacies. And so if you could unlock that, I actually think you might be running downhill after that, right? So I think he knows this. And when I've heard him speak on it, I'm not one of these guys. I'm sure you go to the doctor's lounge in the hospital and you always hear these doctors, they'll listen to some guy coming in, some guy or woman coming in to disrupt. And they're like, well, they don't know how hard it is. That's true. They don't. It's complicated, but I welcome those folks. And I think
they're not saddled with all that, dogma and negativity.
And when I've heard him speak, he's very sensible. I actually think he's got the right degree of humility about what he's up against. And I think, do I think like in 5-10 years he'll be, I can't predict that, but I applaud what he's doing. And to your point, tipping point or whatever, I think like once people see the alternative and once the alternative's in the marketplace, I mean, our lives are full of things that we thought could never happen that are happening, from Uber to whatever, and
AI.
It doesn't happen till it happens. And so I'm actually just very, very curious to see what happens there.
I think we're ready, as doctors, we're ready for a shake up. And I think employers are. I think employers are finally, I say finally, could have said that 3-4 years ago, saying finally. But, I think with the, I bring it back to Mark Cuban. He's actually at scale carving into a marketplace that wants no part of transparency with transparency.
Yeah.
Once you do that and you prove that that's successful, first of all, it's going to save a ton of people a ton of money. But you don't think employers are going to want to jump on that train and car. Now, what he was saying, what was interesting, and it makes perfect sense, is that the drug manufacturers are getting, pushback from the PBMs, insurance companies, basically saying, don't deal with him or else. Yeah. Basically threatened.
Yeah.
And so, but he's, you just keep pushing forward, and at some point, people are going to demand it. It's going to be led by people with their wallets eventually, you know. It's a very complex topic. One of the, as a pediatrician, I wanted to switch topics a little bit for a moment. Mental health. We're seeing an epidemic of children, kids, young adults have a lot of trouble, you know, dealing with the stress of everyday life, frankly. As someone who probably has these conversations frequently with parents and kids, what is your approach to that these days, and what do you think is at the root of it?
It's true. I mean, that's that characterization. A lot of times you read things in the papers, and when it at least comes to healthcare, you're like, that's overstated or that's overblown. It's actually not in healthcare. Like, I've said this a couple of times. When I started, and this is actual, when I started like 15 years ago, if I made one mental health or developmental referral on a kid in a month, the office would stop. The team would be like, child psych, what's going on? Like, it's ENT, derm, ortho, ENT, derm, ortho. Mm-hmm. Today, if you come to our office, we make, and this is not hyperbole, we make more mental health referrals than all the other specialties combined. And so that's happened. I've been practicing 15 years or so. That's the shift that's happened. That couldn't be more dramatic. And it's scary. It's especially scary because nobody has a clear answer. And because on one level, kids have less reason than ever before to be stressed. Like, you know, despite the world is never a perfect place and there's always problems, but there's a really smart, I think he's a sociology professor at Harvard, Dr. Steven Pinker. And he has a great book about how he shows graphs and statistics. Like, take a luxury item like a mobile phone. Like 15 years ago or 10 years ago, what percentage of the world had a mobile phone versus now? What percentage of the world lived below the poverty line 10 to 15 years ago versus now? What percentage of the population had a TV versus not? These things now are commonplace no matter who you are. And actually, hardships, severe poverty, illiteracy, objective metrics have vastly improved across the board. And so from quantitative and qualitative indicators, it's hard. If I covered this side of the equation and I said, are kids happier or sadder? And I gave you all the data over the last 15 to 20 years, there's no one who could rationally derive from that data that kids are worse off today than they were. And so there's a haziness. Now, there's another guy, Dr. John Hay, actually his book's the New York Times bestseller, Anxious America or something, I forget. I've read his previous books. This one just came out. He's a professor at NYU. And his whole thesis, and I tend to agree with, by and large with it, is that social media is a huge element of this. And I will tell you what I find anecdotally now. Like, I haven't done any studies on this, but treating a lot of kids, what I find is a few things about mental health. I try to be practical. Is when I was a kid or when you were a kid, we spent the majority of our time not in a classroom, outside. Whether we were getting sunlight, which has benefits, whether we were running around physically, which has numerous benefits, whether we were interacting while we were running outside with our boys, playing football or soccer, mm-hmm. which instilled competitiveness, physicality, which is important, teamwork, socialization, simply saying, hey, let me pass the ball to you. Kids today can go 3-4 days without having a verbal conversation with another child because they're in the classroom, they come home, they're with mom, and all their conversations are texting. And so they're not verbal, so they can't communicate. They're not running around, they're not physical. There's no teamwork, there's no interaction. And so we took all that away. And then what we replaced it with is, I always say, this is how I would tee this point up. What we replaced with is this. When you're starting like 9, 10, 11 years old until, you're an adult, parents don't like to hear this. The people your kids hang out with are the other set of parents, whether you like it or not. Mm-hmm. When you and I were a kid, we had 3 boys, each of us. Our parents knew them. They came over, they had pizza with us. Our parents knew their parents. And if one of them was a little off, their parents and our parents made sure they weren't. And so the other set of parents, also known as your social circle, were under our parents' thumb. Mm-hmm. Here's the problem. That other circle now is the whole world, because we took that first part away, and what we replaced it with is, here's a screen behind which you have access to every man, woman, good, bad, or ugly across the world who also is in front of a screen. And so try to control that. You can't control that. This isn't Bob and Jimmy, your two friends that are on the baseball team with you, where your parents are like, Bob's great, Jimmy's pretty good, but we'll keep an eye on him. This is everybody in the world who has anything inappropriate, depressing, psychologically traumatic, comparative to say that your kid is absorbing. And so when you take away the first part and you infuse the second part, it's nothing short of a complete discombobulation of what is not even a full brain yet. It's a developing brain. And so now you have kids sitting, absorbing, getting poisoned. I think that when you take that step back and then you throw in some other stuff like what COVID did to a lot of the mental health of kids, infused a ton of anxiety, the anxiety statistics are crazy. I think when you do all that, then there's some overparenting that I think is very bad for kids. And that's a whole separate conversation where it became, a few years ago, it became a la mode to brag about how much parenting you do. Like, no, I won't let him go anywhere, or this or that, or to coddle. The best parenting at a certain point is the least parenting. You know, when your 5-year-old has a conflict in the playground, if you're quick to intervene and settle things and helicopter parent, you're not doing him any favors. He needs to, that's a safe time for him to sort it out and gain those skills. If you prevent it then, he's 15 tomorrow, now it's in the cafeteria, has never sorted it out for himself, and there's consequences. And then he gets anxious and depressed because he doesn't have the practice.
Well, he probably is waiting for mom or dad to come in and help him out.
Yeah.
It's interesting, you brought up replacing, you know, either peers, your kids' friends' parents with, you know, maybe you don't know them as well. Maybe there's more access to the greater world out there. There's certainly one of the things I think that we all thought of as a really great thing about the internet was it connected us around the world. It really was like an interconnection, a window into the world of everywhere else. You ever take a hike with your kids when they were really young?
Yeah.
And watch what they're doing? They're just looking at the sticks and the rocks and the frogs and
exploring. Discovering.
And I'm looking at the beautiful vista and the sun and the clouds. Your perspective over your life changes appropriately so, you know, from the minute to the larger picture. And, you know, I almost feel like in that way, to your point, like looking at kids are being almost forced to look at the bigger picture of the world and the concerns and the stresses and the conflict in a lot of ways. So that may be one element there too.
That's a great point. I never contemplated that. That's a very interesting, like where they're getting what they're getting at what developmental stage.
Yeah. I mean, they're seeing stuff at ages that we didn't see stuff.
Right.
And so that has an impact whether they respond to it or not. And, you know, I think that's an element too. I do think it's interesting how the language is changing. You ever watch those like old time, you know, or you know, you watch even like some of those period pieces back in the 1800s and they're speaking in interesting English. I'm like, how did that change?
Yeah.
To like 100 years. Yeah. But like my kids are speaking in like with words that I can't understand. I had to learn a new language basically to figure out what they're talking about. So the language is changing right out in front of our face. So I kind of get it now. Yeah. But yeah, there's all sorts of things. And I wonder too, I think there's a lot of struggle with identity. Mm-hmm. And I think we all get preoccupied with like sort of these lesser identities. And one of the things that, you know, I think is a real challenge these days is how much emphasis we put on different categories or how we identify ourselves, and then we're so preoccupied with that we forget our common identities amongst ourselves, and we by not acknowledging that or seeing that, we're really unfortunately handicapping ourselves from foreseeing the opportunities we have as human beings for the short period of time we're here on this planet. So, you know, it's a struggle, and we do a lot. You have to put a ton of work into your kids. I'm sure you do the same way my wife and I do. But it's really sad to see when kids are struggling, and you know, and a lot of it, to be quite honest with you, seems to be a lot of times coming from the home, right? It always is. So it really reemphasizes the fact that not only is it the kid who is on social media, but it's the parent who's on social media, who's then not paying attention to the kid on social media. It's dissociating the family unit. There's no lessons being learned. There's no discussions being had. To your point, kids aren't talking to their parents. Kids aren't talking to their friends. They're texting their friends. So it kind of makes sense why we are where we are. And so without putting in the work and unwinding what, you know, social media companies want us to do, we really have to basically, you know, put those limits, take away the alerts, and I'm not throwing stones. I mean, I have the same challenges using social media. I don't know how much you use it, but like I know you guys, your company's on there. I do a lot of our social media stuff, you know, and a lot of the ideas. I'm on there creating things, but it sucks a lot of time. And then guess what? When you're on there, that algorithm will catch you. Next thing you know, you're scrolling and a half hour goes by and you're watching videos, sending videos to your spouse. Oh, this is funny. But your kids are just hanging out. You know, so hopefully doing homework. Right. but yeah, I think it's a big challenge. It's a challenge for us. Not only for the kids, but the kids are going to be left with, you know, the development that they may or may not have gotten when they were younger. I think it's just, and I think that what I glean from that is it's just like the next thing on the parenting list, where you have to recognize it and you have to have certain expectations in the household about screen time and what they're allowed to see and what they're not allowed to see. And it is what it is. And I think there's a school, I forget where, I think it's in the Midwest, that recently passed some local legislation that you're not allowed to have your phones during school. Like that's kids, a good thing. I agree with that.
The school. And what Dr. John Haidt is saying is actually a fascinating part of his study, which tells you a lot, is when you go to kids and you ask them, hey, they had them like for 3 days, no phones, like a 13-year-old, no phones. They have no phones, so they go outside, they shoot hoops with their friend, they're drawing, they're hanging out. And then 3 days with the phone, you say, where was the kid happier? Smiling more, laughing more, happier. And they actually studied this. And unsurprisingly, the kid was happier without the phone. And so the kid would say, I don't want you give them an option the next day. Do you want to be with the phone, or you want to go outside and play with your friends? I want to go outside and play with my friends. Well, then why do you have the phone? And the answer is because everybody else does.
Because everyone else does.
And so if that's the problem, then you need, I use legislation now, not in the traditional sense of the government making a decision, but communally legislating that if none of the kids had the phones, then none of the kids would feel they had to have the phones. They could be learning, they could be hanging out, whatever. But if one or two kids have the phone, you almost need to have it to function. When my oldest got his phone, I didn't want him to get the phone. The way my wife won the argument was, she said, but literally, this is what she told me. I think she was being honest. She said something about how the school, like for him to get picked up or to notify somebody to unlock a gate at school, the kid basically
they need a key.
Like from like a functional standpoint, when you get to 12, 13, 14, assignments, well, if he's late, he can do this. It's gotten to the point where it's almost functional and necessary. And so I think when you say, no, nobody has it, therefore nobody needs to have it, I think that's where it comes from. Because as a parent, you could limit it, but almost there's a point where you're putting your kid in an awkward position where he or she's literally left out of this. So it has to almost come from that third party, be it the school or whatever. And I think that's starting. And I think that's helpful.
One of the things that we've run into is we have limitations, and there's software you can use. They always find their little ways around it, but you know, it is helpful. We use, I think, Custudio. There's also like Bark. There's a few others, but it's been good. You know, it shuts their device down. One of the things that's hard, and I think I would have a hard time with it, because when I was in medical school, I think it was last time I was like sitting down in the library studying a book. We had like the kiosks. You remember the old like libraries? They had like the hard computers, the big tube computers. You have to literally get up from your table,
Yeah.
walk across the library, sit down. You know, you're going to take like a 15, 20-minute break, just surf the old school internet and check some stuff, check your email, and that was it. And you're going to go back. Maybe you had a phone, maybe you didn't. I think I had like a flip phone.
Yeah.
But that was it. And we'd sit down and open a textbook
Yep.
and you focus.
Yeah.
Now, textbooks are PDFs that they find online, web-based. And by the way, on their computer, you know, they have their access to their iMessage, their email, and at any given point, or social media, any given point, they get a little bit bored, or this is like, oh,
That's
this is
right,
like, I'm just going to check my messages. And I couldn't imagine what I would do. I mean, I'd have to really segregate my, but my kids are in middle school. I mean, it's like elementary school. It's like, it's so hard. And the challenges they have to face technologically. And by the way, we've thought of it like, well, what's the alternative? There is no alternative.
Yeah.
So, you know, I tell them to put it on focus mode, and it really takes a lot of early discipline, you know, on their part. So it's a big challenge. So many challenges, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah, I think, like I said, I think that's the new modality of parenting. And I think you have to say, in the old days meaning when we were kids, our parents would have to drag us inside. I just do the opposite. Instead of fighting some of these technological fights, because my kids are smarter than me when it comes to that. If I say focus mode, they're going to laugh and do some behind the back pass that I didn't know was coming. I just say, cool, whatever. You have to be outside for 3 hours. I don't care if you stare at the wall or you shoot hoops with your brother, or you go for a walk with the dog. And guess what? 15 minutes after complaining, the ball's bouncing, they're laughing, and they're playing with their neighbors.
when we've taken away my kids' iPads and phones over the years, it's like, you know, it's the initial like heroin withdrawal.
Yeah.
It's like writhing, crying, like stomping, doors are slamming. And then by like an hour later, they're like angels.
Yep. Yeah.
They're just sort of they've evened out.
Yeah.
They're starting to, you know, do board games, pick up physical, you know,
100%.
real world things. And it's really remarkable how easy that were. And I think parents are just afraid of that reaction.
That's right.
That withdrawal reaction. You can't be. You're not their friends. You're their parents, and it's their duty. And by the way, the kids expect you to do that. If you don't do that, and they're going to be like suckers.
Yeah.
Like, I don't respect them. So, you know, I think that, you know, we're expected to parent, and they know it, and they want us to. And so there's something comforting when we do that, even though they throw a fit. Because they ultimately, it's in their best interest. Because, like you said, they're having a great time.
100%. And I'll say two things about that, because I couldn't agree with you more. Putting my pediatrician hat on, every well visit, I have. Well, Dr. Baker, are you sure it's okay to let her cry? Dr. Baker, are you sure? But she really likes French fries. Every stage, like sleep training at this stage, nutritional discipline at this age. She doesn't like any sports, or he doesn't like any sports. They just want to do this at this age to get physical activity. She's this. At every stage, there's multiple moments where I tell parents, parenting in a word. Parenting is many things. It's many things. You're a provider. You're this. In a word, if there's only one thing you are, you're no. You're no. And I always tell parents, if your job was to just encourage what your kids were doing, God or whoever wouldn't have invented parents. Kids don't need us to say, keep doing that. The main thing they need us for is to say no.
Yeah.
Because if I'm doing something, I don't need you to encourage me to do it. I'm doing it. What you need is the redirection, is the boundaries, and so on. And it's gotten to the point sometimes, especially people hear it from their pediatrician sometimes, I think they think, well, isn't the pediatrician supposed to be loving? I tell them the most loving thing you could do for your kid is give them a sense of empowerment, which is only derived from understanding boundaries and discipline, which they will thank you. And the notion that the only thank you get that's of value is when the kid's 3, to put it politely, is misplaced. If a 3-year-old is happy with your parenting, almost I could guarantee you by definition you're doing a bad job, right? But when that kid's 13, 23, 30, to your point about getting structure, that's when they come back and they say, thank God, when I didn't know better, you did, and you told me what to do, and now I get it. And so that longer term perspective, I think, is critical. And the way you phrased it about they're craving it, like on a subconscious level, is true. So the second remark I'll make is, the other day, on the weekends, one or the other, I have 2 boys, one or the other has to come to work with me. And so almost anytime one of them comes, right, they obviously can't bring any iPads or whatever, and they're allowed to bring a book to read, All right. And they bring the book, and they can either, when they're in the office, they can either read or they can work with the team, right? Answering phones, dealing with the members, care coordination. Even they come to the rooms with me sometimes. That's their choices. And invariably, when we're driving home, let's say it's a Saturday, we're driving home at 3:00, invariably, the kid will not stop talking about the micro experiences he had in the office. Hey, Dad, there was this new patient and they were asking this, and I told them this, and then I explained to them what holistic is. And then me and Mo, we told them about the yoga thing, and then they said they like this on the social media, and I told them, do you want to meet Mo? He's like, and they conversations and kind of inspiration that they've never come to me after watching a reel with. And then also at that point, we get home, and the deals I make with them is, if you do that, when you come home, you have 1 or 2 hours on Saturday with your iPad, last thing on their mind. They're like, okay, are we going to go for a walk now? Are we going to, it's almost like they're re-energized, reinvigorated.
Yeah.
And so everything you said, I see firsthand, but it's hard. It's hard for us, and you're busy, and half the time we're not around our kids. You do the best you can. But I think half the battle is the awareness that this is something not great for our kids. And we got to set the example and provide the discipline.
You bring up a good point. Like, you're bringing your kids to work. They're doing service. They're doing something. They're sacrificing their time, obviously under duress. No, but they're being brought with, you're bringing them to work, and they're getting invaluable experience they're not getting at school. They're seeing people, they're interacting, they're having conversations, they're doing all the things that we know are extracted out of their lives in other places. So you're reinserting them into that mold, and that's really great. And ultimately, they're giving their thoughts, their brains are working. I think that's one of the early return issues that I have with ChatGPT is that, there's a lot of soft cheating out there. I call it soft cheating because, it's out there, it's an app. You can put in an entire textbook or chapter on a textbook into ChatGPT, tell them to summarize it and answer these 5 questions. It'll spit out answers. And guess what? ChatGPT just thought for you.
Yeah.
So now your gears are just sitting there atrophying, and they're not doing, your brain is not doing what it should be doing that we used to do. Read this chapter, think about it, crunch. That's hard. That freaking hurts. You gotta, but then you start to get in the process of processing the information, organizing the information. Those are parts of your brain that light up on an MRI. If you skip all that and then are just copying and pasting, what are you? So that's really good. And I think that the more, as parents, it's incumbent on us, because most schools, they don't even know what to do with ChatGPT at this point. We really have to be on the forefront of, not having wasted years of our kids. Like, I didn't know what to do. They were just using it all along. No, they're going to miss out on critical developmental stages, I think. And we're going to kind of reap the whirlwind of that at some point down the road. Now, if your kids, and you're smart enough to make sure your kids don't fall into that, that's great, because they're going to be advantaged relative to all their peers many of their peers who may have done that. It's tragic. I think it's going to be it's like a subtle, soft tragedy that our society is going to, and then by the way, guess what's going to happen? We're just going to replace those people who don't know how to think with machines who do. And then they'll be run by the people who did think during their, their development. So it's a weird time, man. I don't know where we're going, but it's like,
I think it goes back to like the fundamentals, like whichever profession you're choosing, if the fight is social media for your 13-year-old, if the fight is ChatGPT for your 11-year-old, I think those variables, we need to be keenly aware of them. I think they all have positives and lots of negatives, but I think that the easier battle I go back to as a parent, because I'm not smart enough to figure all that out, is I'm not going to fight these micro battles, go outside for 3 hours, or instead of me wondering, is your brain going to be lazy because you did this or that? Guess what? You have to read a book X amount of time and tell me about the book and summarize it to me. And I want you to have these core principles. I want you to really know what integrity means and to demonstrate it. I want you to be of service. I want you to be the cousin or the brother or the person that people go to when they need something. And communication, right? I have if we're at dinner and one of the kids has an opinion, Luca's the best. No, Kawhi's the best. I don't let it stop there. I say, okay, you have 3 minutes. Give me the argument on Luca. You have 3 minutes on Kawhi.
Debate team.
Well, just that articulation, just
Right.
the verbal, like they've done studies where they look at how many words the average 13-year-old says today compared to just 10 years ago. And it's a magnitude of order of magnitude difference. And so we wonder why now kids don't make eye contact or talk to you.
Yeah.
It's, they don't in the beginning because of screen time, but even now, then what happens is they don't because they don't know how to. And so it's on us to infuse just those kinds of interpersonal skills and so on.
Yeah.
And so I try to control the levers I can and sprinkle like, hey, that stuff sucks too. But I think when I tell them, don't do that, it carries a little weight. I think the biggest thing is to kind of have them imbued with the proper core beliefs and principles so that they see things the way we do, because they start to have that innate kind of foundation rather than me convincing them of it.
Makes a lot of sense. Spirituality. What role does that play, if any, in your life, in your family's life?
My family's made up of a hodgepodge of people. I think, for me, I'm not the most spiritual guy that's ever walked the planet. I find a lot of the spirituality in the work that I do or that we do. Humanity and the connection. Mm-hmm. That's the most kind of moving thing I've ever experienced. I find that like someone comes in, they have a problem, a kid can't walk, a kid can't talk, family comes in, because also in my field, you have to remember, and this is, my brother's an internist. He deals with adults, and he's the first one to say this. When it comes to taking care of someone's kids, it's a little different. Like, you kind of care about your health, but you obsess over your kid's health. And so when someone comes in and there's something wrong with their kid and you're able to fix something, that connection you have with families is godly. It's they take you in. There's a lot of families that I feel like honestly, like I'm part of their family and they feel like they're part of mine, because there's nothing more intimate or spiritual than when you take the thing people care about the most in their life, more than their house, more than their car, many times more than their religion, many times more than anything. They care about their kid's well-being. That's at the top of most people's list. And then when you can improve their state in some way, big, small, or otherwise, that's a unique connection. I get a lot of fulfillment from that relationship.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And, I think that's for those who aren't doctors and don't get that, sometimes maybe that's where we're missing out in our society. People who have other jobs where they don't get that fulfillment.
Sure.
And maybe, so there's a lot of distractions these days.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate you coming on, man.
This was a blast.
Been good. Yeah.
Couldn't have had more fun. This was great.
Yeah. A lot of important topics.
Yeah.
Could probably fill another 2 hours.
Look forward to it.
More.
Thank you for having me.
We'll keep it going.
Much appreciated.
Thanks, brother.
Beautiful. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah.